Has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true. I'm feeling good.
CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Russian President Vladimir Putin met with China's top diplomat, Wang Yi.
There will certainly be consequences for China should they deepen their relationship with Russia.
Or why do we still need a congressional committee to investigate COVID?
Well, I would hope that we do it so that we can bring some clarity and transparency to the American people.
Every single time we have a caucus, we have to fight for it.
I am so thankful that we have President Trump in office. Frankly, the policies that we were able to pass from 2017 to 2020 were monumental.
Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Weijia Jiang in Washington. Thank you for joining us. As the war in Ukraine enters its second year, tensions are growing between the U.S. and China over the conflict. U.S. officials are raising concerns that Beijing could provide lethal military aid to the Russian war effort. China's top diplomat met in Moscow yesterday with Vladimir Putin. The Russian president said he's looking forward to a visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping, which is expected as early as next month. For more, Margaret Brennan and Nancy Cordes joins us now. Margaret is CBS News' chief foreign affairs correspondent and, of course, the moderator of Face the Nation. And Nancy is CBS News' chief White House correspondent. Margaret, I want to start with you because it was on your show this past Sunday that Secretary of State Antony Blinken actually gave you a few more details about these weapons. So I want to play what he said and chat on the other side.
The concern that we have now is based on information we have that they're considering providing lethal support. And we've made very clear to them that that would cause a serious problem for us and in our relationship.
Lethal support. What would that entail? What do you think of?
Weapons.
That's ammunition. That's
primarily weapons.
Primarily.
There's a whole gamut of things that, that fit in that category, for everything from ammunition to the weapons themselves.
It seems like this is a red line for the administration. So I wonder what happens if China crosses it and does provide those weapons.
I was trying to get the secretary to be specific there, and he was avoiding it deftly. But to say weapons and ammunition and a gamut, he's directing towards what China hasn't done to date. We know that Chinese entities have provided satellite imagery to the Wagner Group, a Russian mercenary group in Ukraine, to actually help those mercenaries target better. And yet the U.S. considers that non-lethal. It's literally to help combat on the ground to the advantage of the Russians. But to put a gun in a hand, ammunition in the hand, that's where the administration is drawing this bright line. And it's so interesting that they are going public with this because as recently as February 2nd, the CIA director was saying this for Xi Jinping was the line, that his partnership without limits with Vladimir Putin actually wouldn't go this far because China says they want to bring this war to an end. And we are expecting from Beijing an announcement of this so-called peace plan as soon as tomorrow. So that doesn't make them a credible actor if they are actually going to help elongate the duration of the war and help Vladimir Putin to go through with this. And when it comes to that red line language, the administration hasn't detailed exactly what they mean, other than sanctions at this point.
Right. And I'm so glad you brought that up, in addition to the fact that they are going public with this, because, Nancy, in the White House press briefing today, you pressed Karine Jean-Pierre about what evidence the U.S. has that China might provide this lethal aid. So let's take a listen to that.
When should we expect to see some evidence supporting the administration's assertion that China is considering providing lethal aid to the Russians?
Look, we haven't seen China do that yet, and we certainly don't have any information for you on this at this time. But as we have said, we have seen China provide this kind of support. Like, we haven't seen China provide this kind of support yet, but they haven't said it's off the table.
Nancy, what do you make of her answer there? Because saying that China hasn't taken it off the table is not the same as saying the U.S. has definitive evidence that this is what they're going to do. So is there intelligence, or is this the administration posturing to send Beijing a message not to do it?
We're told that there is intelligence, Ouija. In fact, all week long, we were told that we were going to be able to look at least get a glimpse at some of that evidence any day now, but it hasn't happened. And so that was a White House press secretary who was being very cautious about what she revealed. There seems to be some back and forth between the administration, the State Department, and the intelligence community about what exactly they can say about what they know without revealing how they found it out. We're still told that we are going to get more information at some point. But as Margaret was saying, it seems that they came out sort of guns a-blazing even before they were ready to share the evidence backing up their assertions, because they wanted to send a very loud message to the Chinese. We know you're thinking about this, and don't do it. Otherwise, you're going to face consequences, namely in the form of sanctions. Now, you might argue they've sanctioned the Russians up and down over the past year, and that hasn't stopped them. But the argument that I've heard from White House officials is that that means a lot more to the Chinese. Their economy is much more integrated with the world economy than the Russian economy is, and so therefore sanctions would hurt more and might cause them to think twice if they're considering helping the Russians in this way.
And on that note, Margaret, can you talk about why that matters for the American consumer? Because obviously China's walking such a delicate line here, because they're wrapped up not only in the Russian economy, but the U.S. economy. And if there is a misstep, that could have huge implications here at home.
Huge implications. And we're already seeing this tension play out. You know, we think about guns and fights. No, this is playing out in the business space and the technology space. And China's the second fastest growing economy in the world. It is a behemoth even after COVID. It's not just a manufacturing hub, but they have moved into so many different areas and have so much exposure in Europe and so much exposure here in the United States, just even in terms of the U.S. debt that they own, that it makes it next to impossible to actually separate the two economies if you had to. Russia, you could try to isolate because other than commodities, they don't export a lot. Try finding something that's not made in China, that's for sale in this country,
Exactly.
right? Try finding and cutting it off in terms of even just sanctions. I went back and I was looking at the Treasury list from the end of January, and that company I was referring to that was helping to provide the satellite imagery, their shell company was in Luxembourg. So it's not just talking about, trying to split the globe in half. This is an economy that is so integrated that it is almost impossible to pull apart. The business community has also been struggling with this and the pressure from the administration for some time. So this is where we're seeing more emphasis from the Biden administration to beef up the amount of scrutiny it has into the private sector. It's because of things like this.
And Nancy, money is one thing, power is another, and China is closely watching this war in Russia, and specifically the U.S.'s involvement, because it continues to eye Taiwan. So what message do you think the president sent to Xi Jinping when he went directly to Kyiv?
Right. He was sending a message that the West remains firmly in Ukraine's camp 1 year later, and that despite the costs, the ongoing cost, that the U.S. and European allies are not going to waver. They're not going anywhere, and they're going to stick around as long as necessary in this fight. In fact, he was really kind of bracing the West for a very long, drawn-out war that may sort of look like a stalemate to the outside world for quite a few months, possibly years to come. They're really starting to dig in. But it's really a tricky balancing act for the administration, because on one hand, they're warning China, hey, stay out of this. On the other hand, they are trying to improve relations with China. And, they've had a couple of setbacks recently, particularly the shooting down of a Chinese spy balloon. But they are still working to reestablish better working relationships with Chinese officials. And they've even indicated that perhaps the best thing to sort of clear the air would be another conversation, at least a phone conversation between President Xi and President Biden at some point in the future, though there's nothing on the books right now.
Right. To say this relationship is complicated is to say the least. Margaret Brennan and Nancy Cordes, thank you both very much.
You're welcome.
And don't forget to watch Margaret this Sunday on Face the Nation when she'll speak to former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice right here on CBS News. Sources tell CBS News that prosecutors are asking a federal judge to compel former Vice President Mike Pence to testify in the special counsel's investigation into January 6th. The special counsel's office filed the motion requesting Pence comply with the grand jury subpoena. The former vice president has signaled he would oppose it, and lawyers for former President Trump have asserted executive privilege in response to the former VP's subpoena. The Biden administration has turned over hundreds of records to the House subcommittee investigating the origins of COVID-19. CBS spoke with the committee's chairman about what he hopes to glean from the documents. You're streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today. I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming racism.
I feel like it's just a war zone between all different races.
Will this generation continue the problem?
The kids pushed them away and didn't want them to be there because of their race.
Or be the solution?
We just need to keep raising our voices. We're all human and we don't deserve that type of treatment just because of how we look.
Are the kids all right? Racism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme, CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real, you'll have time to get prepared. Feel the forecast. Weather when it matters most on CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely.
As Taiwan faces threats and aggression,
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, there are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Weijia Jiang. The Department of Health and Human Services has released 900 pages of records to a GOP-led panel investigating the Biden administration's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. The committee is specifically looking into whether the coronavirus originated in a lab in Wuhan, China, whether the Chinese government covered up any wrongdoing, and if U.S. tax dollars helped fund the facility. The panel's chairman, Republican Representative Brad Winstrup, told CBS News he would consider subpoenas against key federal officials if they do not provide adequate responses to the committee's questions. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now from Waterboro, South Carolina. Scott, thanks so much for being with us today. So just walk us through the timeline here and remind us who this committee wants to talk to.
Yeah, this committee, now under Republican control, has yielded some results, making it one of the first Republican-led House committees to get records in an inquiry. The Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic sought internal records, calendars, communications from top Biden administration health officials, including the head of the NIH, the Health and Human Services Secretary, and Dr. Anthony Fauci. They got in return about 900 records. We're not sure exactly what's in those records, but we do know this committee is investigating the theory that COVID leaked from the Wuhan lab and that the federal government might have provided some of the resources toward that lab. So that inquiry aside, we talk with the top Republican and top Democrat on this committee about what else they seek to explore now that we're reaching the 3-year mark of this pandemic, 3 years after shutdowns and school closures. Let's hear from both the top Republican and top Democrat on the now Republican-controlled Select Committee on COVID.
We can bring some clarity and transparency to the American people. American people have a lot of distrust right now because they felt like they were told different things at different times. You know what? This virus was called novel for a reason, and it was very unpredictable.
Making sure that those most vulnerable receive the attention and resources to help save as many lives as we possibly can, to really understand the experience of isolation and all the ramifications that could come with that in terms of the mental health byproduct or side effects of responding to a pandemic as deadly as this, in order to help us be more resilient.
So there's this sense this committee will explore issues involving the shutdowns, the impact on mental health, including on young people, perhaps an investigation into the broader issues of how to prevent a future pandemic. But there is a challenge here, Weijia, a distinctive challenge. COVID, the pandemic, and both the Trump administration response and the Biden administration response have been saturated with politics and political accusations by the opposing party. We'll see if these two members, both of whom are doctors, are able to depoliticize COVID as we reach the 3-year mark.
Scott, that is a big task. Thank you very much for your reporting. The DNC stripped Iowa of its leadoff status in the Democratic nomination calendar earlier this month. But the Hawkeye state still leads the way for the GOP in determining its presidential candidate for 2024. This comes as 2024 Republican presidential contenders begin to put Iowa into focus. Nikki Haley and Tim Scott each visited the state earlier this week, while Mike Pence and Asa Hutchinson made appearances last week. Iowa GOP Chairman Jeff Kaufman joins us now. Jeff, it's great to see you.
Great to be here.
So your state is the hot place to be this month. I wonder, of all those people we just rattled off, who's getting the most attention?
I'm so proud of this state. And if the national Democrats would give them a chance, our Iowa Democrats would be just as enthusiastic too. But at every gathering, it is absolute enthusiasm. Crowd expectations are beyond. Iowans are used to kicking the tires. They're used to going to events. They're used to the questions. Right now, it's just an enthusiasm that we're going to start here in the Hawkeye State, and we're going to do the country proud. We're not going to pick the presidential candidate, but we're going to winnow the field, and we're going to look at everyone carefully.
Do you think that enthusiasm can translate into one of those people, maybe someone else who's not named Donald Trump, actually winning? Or are Republicans in your state already dedicated to the former president?
Certainly, the president has a great deal of admirers here in this state. Does that translate into caucus votes? We will see on the evening of caucus. But I can tell you this. Iowans are going to give everyone a chance to be heard. The party itself and the party structure is going to be neutral. We have taken a public pledge for that. And ultimately, when it's all said and done, there's no better place than a state of a little over 3 million with reasonable media markets and an opportunity to visit every county. The people are going to have a say. But certainly, President Trump is well known here. He is going to have a chance to make his case to be president again. But all of those other contenders are going to be making their case as well and are as we speak.
Well, I want to talk about someone who is not doing that, and in fact has not even formally announced that he plans to run. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Do you think that he's waiting too long? Does someone need to get in right now, or is May, June okay to come to Iowa and make their case?
There's always a strategy about timing, of course. There are some that want to get in immediately. Ultimately, people are going to have to decide whether to get in or not in terms of qualifying for debates. But, remember Fred Thompson. He waited quite a while to get in, created a stir. There are others that have gotten in very, very early. And obviously, the president jumped in very early and left really little to the imagination in terms of what his intentions were even before that. I think it's a strategic decision. I'm not sensing that its time is now. I think as long as people are talking about you, as long as they're a buzz, if they're talking about you in the Hawkeye State, sometimes that's as good as being in the Hawkeye State. But I want them all here.
Do you hear people talking about DeSantis?
I do. I am just stunned, to be honest with you, the amount of people that are showing up at these events. We've had events over on the Mississippi area that have been sold out. They were bringing in chairs. I've got people from last night that have been calling me today about Tim Scott. I have individuals that one lady called me last night, and she texted me and said, "I met Nikki Haley. It's been wonderful. She's better than I ever expected." There are folks wondering when Governor DeSantis is going to be here. When is Donald Trump going to be here? The Hawkeye State is ready to be excited, and we are going to do our job, and we're going to give everybody a chance here.
Do you think Donald Trump should go? I mean, despite the fact that he already has, strong support there.
I have yet to find a person that has been successful in presidential politics that did not come to Iowa. Every candidate, if there's any lesson whatsoever that needs to be heard, if you look at history all the way back to the 1970s, is beware of skipping Iowa. Ultimately, that's going to get you, whether it be in the caucus here in Iowa, during the entire primary process, or in the general election. The Hawkeye State is a state that you do not want to miss. In terms of when you come into the state, again, that's a strategic decision, and I'll let that up to the well-informed analyzers and consultants.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do have a quick question about Iowa Democrats, and I wonder if you are talking to them, trying to encourage them to fight with the DNC to keep their place, since the DNC has decided to boot them out of that top spot.
It is the one truly bipartisan part of my job. I stand 100% with the Iowa Democrats on this. They were set up in 2020. They were handed an app by the DNC that was bound to fail. I was there. I knew how ready they were. Now this curveball that was thrown to them, we all know what's going on with South Carolina. Okay, Bernie Sanders could beat Joe Biden in an Iowa Democratic caucus. AOC could beat Joe Biden in an Iowa Democratic caucus. We all know that Joe Biden's not coming here because he can't win. We all know that he's starting out in South Carolina because the poor soul needs some help. Can you even imagine what people would say about the Republican Party if we were changing an entire system just to help one candidate? No, I am giving the Iowa Democrats every bit of support. I'm offering to work with them when we can on everything from reporting to an app. I am behind them 100%, and shame on the DNC for thumbing their nose at the entire Midwest, because Michigan isn't the Midwest. It's Detroit and rural area. Right now, the Midwest does not have an option in our early process.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, Jeff Kaufman. Right, gotcha. We will have to leave it there, but we look forward to talking to you a lot in the next year and a half. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
My pleasure.
South Carolina Senator Tim Scott hasn't officially jumped in the race for president, but he's making all the moves that a candidate running would make. How would he take on Donald Trump, and would those in his own state choose him over their former governor, Nikki Haley? You're streaming Red and Blue.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Yoga and wellness has become a place of anti-science.
Online clickbait.
The algorithms feed you content based upon your own fantasy.
Potentially at my peril.
There's no question about it.
Spreading digital disinformation.
Their entire yoga studio and spiritual community got so embedded in all of the QAnon stuff that it became this sick place.
Why pro-health people are fertile ground for anti-science messages.
We can just go into the whole mask thing. A lot of us just believe that's symbolism for silencing people.
People are locked in this mindset. They've been taught to accept what the medical doctors say.
No longer are you going to be willing to take any medical advice.
It's a big problem that we urgently need to address.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future.
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico
and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
After decades in the public eye and public service, this mother-daughter duo is now talking about gutsy women.
What's the gutsiest thing you've ever done?
We go person to person with Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton and Chelsea Clinton.
Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Have you had any conversations with the former president, Donald Trump, about a potential run, and what has he said to you about it?
Yeah, I think President Trump and I, we have had some texts, but the truth of the matter is we're not talking about politics. We're talking about the issues that are important overall.
That was South Carolina Senator Tim Scott in Iowa, alongside the state's Governor Kim Reynolds in Iowa yesterday. Scott has been making moves to jump into the race. Yesterday, he made multiple stops in the First in the Nation caucus state as a part of his Faith in America listening tour. So far, he seems to be staying away from attacking Donald Trump. CBS News political director Finn Gomez joins us now. Thank you, Finn, as always. So is this a good strategy for Tim Scott to play nice with Donald Trump?
Well, right now, I mean, he essentially has to because it's so early, and he hasn't jumped in. He's doing this listening tour to these early states, Iowa, as you mentioned yesterday. But sources familiar with Scott's thinking that I spoke to today and say this is about his brand. He's really trying to deliver this message of hope and optimism. Yesterday, he talked about this new American sunrise, new leaders who lift us up, not tear us down. It is about finding that space, that contrast, not only between Donald Trump, but potentially the rest of the Republican field, or a big part of the Republican field, the potential Republican field. So that's part of it. They also say this is part of his authenticity, who he is, and if you ask any of his Senate colleagues, they would say the same thing.
Right. So everyone's trying to stand out right now. It is interesting that of the people who have formally announced or who we think will announce, you have a son and a daughter of South Carolina. So what do you think the matchup would be like for Tim Scott and Nikki Haley? Because, you know, obviously they are both have such deep roots there.
Yeah, and that's a great question because, I mean, they both come from South Carolina. Usually the person who's from South Carolina, when they come back along the cycle, along the primary calendar to South Carolina, usually the third, of course, in in that calendar schedule, they have a home court advantage, if you will. This is a little bit different. It's muddled. There are two. They both come from the same traditional conservative wing of the Republican Party. So sometimes they're fighting for the same supporters, the same political resources, the same South Carolina supporters who supported both of them. So yeah, there's some of that. We saw that with Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio in 2016. However, there's enough sources that I've spoken to familiar with these two, and their thinking, say that there's enough space between the lane that they're in, the lanes respectively that they're in, that they could generate momentum through that lane. So,
well, that is exactly what Jeff Kaufman told us. He is the Iowa's GOP chair, and I want to ask you about something he said that about the DNC. He criticized the DNC for changing who gets to go first, kicking Iowa out of that top spot. He claims just to help President Biden. What do your sources tell you about that?
Yeah, I spoke to some Democratic strategists about that specifically that notion that this was done to help one candidate, President Biden. They say that's not the case. They said it's laughable. Frankly, this was done primarily for two reasons. They say the lack of diversity among Iowa caucus goers compared to other early states, and two, frankly, because the second reason with Iowa is that not only does that happen in the sense that, but the sources that I was speaking to say that it's also because the Iowa Democrats completely bungled this up. This happened. Initially it was. Who was it? Was it Buttigieg? Was it Bernie Sanders who won the caucus? And we didn't find out till days later, 16 days, and it changed. But also, this happened with the Republicans in 2012, right? We thought initially it was Mitt Romney who won. We ended up finding out that it was Rick Santorum who won. So,
yes, we all remember those nights very well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Finn.
Thanks, Rich.
That does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream